Okay, get ready to travel back in time, thousands of years, because today we're diving deep into the origins of wine.
I love it. Wine, it's something most of us enjoy without even thinking about where it came from.
You're right about that, but the
Hmm.
story of wine is pretty fascinating, and uh, it actually intertwines with the very development of human civilization. We've got all sorts of stuff to look at today, archaeological reports, scientific studies, even some ancient myths to kind of guide us along the way.
It's a story almost as old as civilization itself.
So let's start at the very beginning. Before the vineyards and wineries we know today,
Yeah.
we're talking wild grapevines
Yeah.
stretching across the Mediterranean and beyond. And it's kind of crazy to think about, but these ancestral vines, the very foundation of all the wine we enjoy today, are now endangered in some areas.
It really highlights the fact that it's important to know where things come from, doesn't it? I mean, these wild vines, they have this unique genetic diversity. They hold valuable clues to wine's past, and they could even play a role in its future.
It's amazing to think about, going back to those early humans, the hunter-gatherers roaming these regions and gathering those wild grapes. Do we have any idea if they were enjoying a form of wine way back then?
I mean, it's possible, right? You can picture those early humans gathering these wild grapes. Some of them would have been inevitably crushed, underfoot or maybe in baskets. Add in some naturally occurring yeasts, a little bit of sunshine, and boom, you've got accidental fermentation. So while we don't have concrete evidence of Paleolithic wine, it's not a far-fetched idea at all. I mean, considering how widespread wild grapes were and how basic the principles of fermentation are.
It's kind of like the very first happy accident,
Yeah.
leading to this beverage that we all enjoy today.
Mm.
But where do we find the first real hard evidence of intentional wine production?
Well, we got to head east to the Caucasus region, specifically to modern-day Georgia. There's a site there called Shulaveris Gora. It dates back to 6000 BCE. Archaeologists there uncovered these ceramic jars containing traces of tartaric acid. And tartaric acid, that's a key indicator of the presence of grapes, and it's like a fingerprint of wine.
6,000 BCE, that's 8,000 years ago. They were analyzing these jars, scientifically to find that out. Like, how does that even work?
Well, it's thanks to something called organic residue analysis. It's a pretty relatively recent development, but it's revolutionized archaeology. Basically, scientists, they take tiny samples from ancient pottery and they analyze them for chemical compounds like tartaric acid that can reveal what those vessels once held. It's like a time machine. It lets us peek into the dietary habits of our ancestors.
I mean, that blows my mind, 8,000 years ago, but this evidence suggests that wine was there. Do we have any clues about what the actual production process was like in that era?
Well, it's kind of like finding a wine glass at an archaeological site. You know that wine was there, but you don't know exactly how it was made or how it was consumed. But we do get more clues a few hundred years later at Haji Firouz Tepe in Iran. It's another fascinating site.
What did they find there?
Well, not only did they find evidence of wine in those, telltale ceramic jars, but they also discovered traces of resin. And this is where it gets really interesting. Resin, you see, back then it was used to waterproof and preserve wine, prevent it from spoiling. It's one of the earliest examples of humans actively trying to control the winemaking process.
So it wasn't just letting nature take its course. They were actually developing techniques to improve and preserve their wine.
Exactly. And this early innovation speaks to how ingenious those early winemakers were. They recognized the challenges of preserving, this precious liquid and they found solutions using the natural world around them.
And what about that site, Arani One in Armenia? I've heard that described as a real time capsule of early winemaking.
Oh, it truly is. It's amazing. Picture yourself stepping into a cave 4000 BCE and you find these large ceramic jars buried in the ground and they still contain remnants of pressed grape skins, even traces of that same resin. It's really like a snapshot of early wine production frozen in time.
So we're seeing these techniques develop and evolve over time. I mean, from accidental fermentation to intentional preservation methods. Pretty amazing to think about those early innovations leading the way for all the winemaking practices we have today.
And from these early centers in the Caucasus, the knowledge of winemaking began to spread outwards. It reached at Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond.
Speaking of ancient cultures, let's move on to Mesopotamia.
Mm.
I've always been really fascinated by how wine got so tied up with the elite culture in that region.
Yeah.
What kind of evidence do we have for that?
Well, Mesopotamia, being a crossroads of civilizations, left behind a ton of information in the form of clay tablets. And these tablets, they were meticulously inscribed with cuneiform script, and they detail everything. We're talking vineyard management, wine varieties, even the specialized professions that were involved in wine production. There's even mention of like a wine man, a figure who was responsible for every aspect of wine from production to service.
A wine man. Now that's a job I could get behind. It's incredible how organized and specialized they were, even back then.
And those clay tablets, they also reveal this fascinating detail, the use of wine in religious rituals and royal ceremonies. Wine wasn't just a drink, you see, it was a symbol of status, power, and even divine connection.
So it sounds like wine quickly became something more than just a basic beverage. It was woven into the fabric of their society. So we've got wine flowing in the Caucasus, taking root in Mesopotamia. What about ancient Egypt? I mean, weren't they known more for their love of beer?
Well, beer was certainly the drink of the common people in ancient Egypt, but wine held a special significance, especially among the elite. Think of those elaborate tomb paintings depicting scenes of wine production, highlighting how important it was in their society.
So wine was a little bit more of a luxury good, kind of a symbol of the pharaoh's power and prestige.
Precisely. The pharaohs, they controlled vast vineyards. Their wealth and authority were linked to this luxurious drink. Imagine their grand feasts with wine flowing freely, a symbol of their elevated status.
So from everyday sustenance to a drink fit for a pharaoh, wine's journey through ancient Egypt is really shows how versatile and adaptable it is.
And as we head westward, we encounter another fascinating chapter in the story of wine, its arrival in ancient Greece.
Now, Greece is often thought of as the birthplace of wine culture, but it seems like the story is a bit more complex than that. So, when does wine actually enter the Greek world, and how does their story challenge the traditional narratives that we have?
The traditional story often says that wine spread west from the Caucasus, to Greece. But recent discoveries are challenging that idea. There's a site in northern Greece, it's called Dikilitas, dating back to 4300 BCE. It's pushing back our understanding of when wine first popped up in the region.
So, we're talking about evidence of wine in Greece that could even be older than the Egyptian and Mesopotamian examples. That's a pretty big deal. What did they actually find at Dikilitas?
Okay, so picture this. Archaeologists, they unearthed this storage jar, a serving jug, and a whole bunch of grape pips, all pointing to a pretty well-established wine culture already happening there. This suggests that wine might have had multiple origins, or at least it was adopted incredibly early on in these different regions.
It really makes you think about how much more complex and interconnected the ancient world was than we often realize.
Yeah.
So if wine was present in Greece that early, what role did it play in the rise of those iconic Bronze Age cultures like the Minoans?
Well, the Minoans, they're known for their beautiful art and those elaborate rituals. They definitely embraced wine. We know from archaeological evidence and also from those linear B tablets that give us a glimpse into their written language. Wine was a key part of their agriculture, their economy, and even their religious practices.
Okay, so they were growing grapes, trading wine, and probably using it in ceremonies. What kind of evidence do we have to support that?
Well, let's start with those tablets that were found at Pylos, a major Mycenaean center on the mainland. These tablets mention things like cultivating grapevines, up trees, possibly even fig trees. And this practice, along with something called intercropping, basically growing grapevines alongside cereal crops, it shows us they had a pretty sophisticated system of agriculture, maximizing land use and yields.
It sounds like they were really ahead of their time when it came to their farming practices. And when it came to enjoying their wine, they certainly weren't lacking in style. I mean, those Minoan drinking vessels, like the famous Bull Riton, they were works of art in themselves.
Absolutely. Those elaborate vessels, often shaped like animal heads or decorated with these intricate designs, and they tell us so much about how wine was perceived. The bull Riton, for example, it suggests a connection to rituals and maybe even to bull leaping, which was a big part of Minoan culture.
It's like the vessel itself made the act of drinking wine even more special,
Yeah.
giving it all this symbolism and meaning. And we see these scenes of wine production in their art as well, right? It seems like they were documenting their wine culture in lots of different ways.
You're right. There's this amazing example from Crete. It shows a man stomping grapes in this big ceramic tub. And it lines up perfectly with what archaeologists have actually found at Minoan sites, similar tubs. It's a great example of how archaeology and art can work together to give us a richer picture of the past.
It's like putting together a puzzle, each piece revealing a little bit more about this ancient world. Now, we've talked about wine as this elite commodity in many cultures. Was that the case with the Minoans, or were everyday people also involved in wine production?
That's a great question, and it's kind of hard to answer definitively. While we do see signs of large-scale wine production, especially at those palace sites, it's tough to say for sure how much everyday farmers were involved. The problem is the archaeological record often reflects more of the lives of the elite. So it's possible that smaller scale production was happening, but we just haven't found evidence of it.
I mean, that makes sense. I mean, those grand palaces and tombs, they're more likely to last, over time than the simple homes of farmers. But even if we don't have direct evidence, it's hard to imagine that everyday people wouldn't have at least been exposed to wine, considering how much a part of Minoan culture it seems to have been. So we've got wine flowing freely in this Minoan world. Where does the story take us next? Does this Minoan wine culture influence other regions?
It seems very likely. The Minoans were known for being great sailors. They had these vast trade networks. So they probably played a big role in spreading their wine culture throughout the Mediterranean. You can just imagine their ships laden with amphorae, those clay vessels they used to transport wine, carrying not just a drink, but also ideas and traditions to all these distant shores.
It's fascinating to think about how these kinds of cultural exchanges help shape the ancient world.
Yeah.
With wine as a way for goods and ideas to flow.
Yeah.
And the Minoans weren't isolated, were they? They had contact with other powerful civilizations, the Egyptians, the Hittites.
Exactly. And wine was flowing back and forth between these cultures, influencing tastes, influencing techniques, maybe even religious practices. It's this complicated, tapestry of interactions, and wine is this common thread that connects them all.
It's almost like this web of interconnectedness with wine as both a product and a catalyst for cultural exchange. What about the Mycenaeans? That's the mainland Greek culture that rose to prominence after the Minoans. Did they inherit this love of wine?
They absolutely did. The Mycenaeans adopted many parts of Minoan culture, including their love of wine. We find evidence of large-scale production at Mycenaean palace sites, and again, we have those Linear B tablets meticulously detailing vineyard management and wine distribution. So it's clear that wine continued to hold this important place in Greek society.
And as wine production becomes more established, do we start to see the emergence of specific regions that are known for their wines, much like we have today with distinct wine regions?
You got it. Places like Crete, Rhodes, Thasos, they were already starting to get a reputation for their unique wines, and it shows a growing sophistication in wine production, and also people were developing this appreciation for regional variations. It's remarkable how those ancient roots still influence the wine world that we know today.
It really is. It's a testament to the lasting legacy of these ancient cultures and how much they contributed to the world of wine. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's stick with the ancient world for a bit longer. What happens to wine as we move out of the Bronze Age and into the archaic and classical periods of Greece?
Well, this is when wine really takes center stage in Greek culture. It becomes so deeply embedded in their mythology, their social gatherings, their philosophical discussions, even their warfare.
Hold on, wine and warfare. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
Well, it might surprise you to learn that Greek soldiers, they often carried rations of wine. And it wasn't just to stay hydrated. It was seen as a way to boost morale, to kind of ease the hardships of military life. It was even used as a reward for bravery on the battlefield.
So wine wasn't just a drink; it was practically a military supply. I guess a little liquid courage can go a long way when you're up against a phalanx of Spartan warriors.
And let's not forget about the cultural side of the Greeks. They had Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and, well, let's just say good times. His presence in Greek mythology really says a lot about how important wine was in their culture.
Ah, yes, Dionysus, the life of the party, always surrounded by by nymphs and satyrs, enjoying those fruits of the vine.
And his association with joy, with celebration, even with spiritual enlightenment, it highlights this multifaceted role that wine played in ancient Greece. It wasn't just a drink, you see; it was a symbol of life, of fertility, and the human connection to the divine.
It's amazing how wine wove its way into every aspect of Greek life, from the battlefield to the symposium. It seems like there was always a reason to raise a glass.
Yeah.
And as Greek culture spread, so did their love of wine.
Right. Oh, absolutely. The Greek colonization of southern Italy and other parts of the Mediterranean was crucial in spreading viticulture and winemaking techniques even further. Those Greek colonists, they were like ancient sommeliers, bringing their knowledge and their passion for wine to all these new lands.
It's like this ripple effect, each culture adding their own unique flavor to the story of wine. And it wasn't just the Greeks who were shaping the wine world at this time, right? What about the Etruscans in Italy? Weren't they known for their own vibrant wine culture?
They were really big into wine, both making it and drinking it. They lived in a region of central Italy. We know it today as Tuscany and Umbria, which, as you know, are still famous for their wines.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about how those ancient traditions are still shaping the modern world of wine. So the Etruscans are adding their own chapter to this story of wine. What can you tell me about their winemaking? What was it like?
Well, from what archaeologists have found, it looks like the Etruscans took techniques from both the Greeks and the native cultures of Italy and kind of combined them. They were known for these really elaborate banquets, and they used wine in religious ceremonies, much like the Greeks did, and they really played a key role in setting up the foundations for what would become the Roman wine empire.
It seems like wine was this constant thread, connecting all these different cultures and influencing how history unfolded.
Yeah.
So we've gone all the way from those wild origins, those ancestral grapevines, to seeing wine become established and evolve within all these different ancient societies.
Yeah.
What would you say is the key takeaway from all this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that wine is so much more than just a beverage. It's really a reflection of human ingenuity, our ability to take a wild plant and transform it into something that's brought people together for thousands of years. It's a story of cultural exchange, technological innovation, and this very human desire for connection, for celebration, and I even say a bit of good cheer.
So the next time we raise a glass of wine, we're not just enjoying a drink. We're taking part in a tradition that goes back, thousands of years.
Yeah.
A tradition that's been shaped by countless hands and cultures.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating. It's not just about learning facts, It's about connecting with the past, appreciating the long, complex history behind something that we often, just take for granted.
Couldn't agree more. This has been an amazing journey from those wild grapevines growing on the hillsides to the bustling vineyards and grand feasts of the ancient world. We've really seen the birth and the evolution of a drink that people still are captivated by today.
And remember, this is just the beginning of the story. Wine keeps evolving. New regions are popping up. New varieties are being created, and new techniques are constantly being developed. So as you're enjoying that next glass of wine, take a moment to think about its incredible journey, all the countless hands that have gone into creating it, from those ancient winemakers to the modern vintners who are carrying on their legacy.
Absolutely. Cheers to that. And cheers to more exploration and discovery in the world of wine. Who knows what other fascinating stories are waiting to be, uncorked.
Indeed. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep those glasses full.